everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Happy 2021 to all of you. Thanks for joining us this year. So glad to see so many people already in. Let me just give a shout out real quick. Toddy, Trish, Cassie. Oh, nice to see you, Cassie. Christiana, welcome back. Laura, Bob, Carlita, Kara, Karthik, Richard, Mo, Angelita, Tara, Brooke, Helena, Vince, Dr. Thet Tinton, thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking about reflection, and I am so honored to have Margie Meacham. Is it Meacham or Meacham? I always say it wrong.
Well, I answer to anything, Luis, but yeah. Meacham with a soft sound.
So the Meacham?
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Margie Meacham, the brain lady. Margie has spoken at TLDC events. In fact, she was at our 2016, our premiere event, which is now like going to be going on 5 years ago. And it is how I met Margie was because she was attending the event and has expertise in neuroscience and reflection and a variety of other things. And I have gotten a lot from our conversations in the past about this, and Margie has just been incredibly helpful all around with a lot of our L&D sort of efforts. And so it's great to have her today, and great to have all of you here today. And we're going to just talk about this. Now, I want to sort of start out talking about there was this worksheet that I posted in Slack last year. To reflect, to help, it was kind of as a tool to help you reflect on 2020 and moving into 2021. And I really encourage you, if you guys haven't seen that worksheet, like just to check it out in Slack. I have it in the general channel, and it's just something you could download from Nest Labs. And it has really, really helped me with thinking about 2020, which was a profound year for a variety of reasons, of course. And I actually filled out the worksheet. I'm going to post what I filled out later today, but I really recommend taking a look at that. I think it helped me a ton. It helped me think a lot about, just what 2020 meant to me and what I want to be sort of focusing on going into 2021. So this reflection conversation is especially poignant because there is so much to reflect on right now. And so we're just going to go into why it's important, just on an individual perspective and a group perspective. So, and so Margie, why don't we start out? Why don't you tell a little bit, for those of you that don't know Margie, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So, and I do see a lot of familiar names, and so in my brain they're familiar faces because I've met you either online or at conferences before. So hi to all of those folks. And it's funny how you find your calling in life, and then you look back, speaking of reflection, and you see how you got where you are. And so that's one thing that I like to do is say, how did I end up here? And I do that every once in a while. And you notice that you actually were on a path. It might feel like you kind of bounced around or you were experimenting, and then you think about everything you learned from different jobs. So I really started the path I'm on when I was about 6 years old and couldn't learn to read. And my parents had to really fight with the school to not hold me back because they felt like whatever's going on, it wasn't intelligence or capability, that I would overcome it. And so my whole family spent a summer teaching me how to read so I could catch up with my class. And we didn't know it at the time, but I'm dyslexic. And so that taught me something about my brain and everyone else's brain. And it just taught me that, I might have to work a little harder than some other people, but I could get there. So I independently learned things like repetition and reflection, taking notes, review, that later were all validated by neuroscience. And as I went through my career, I started off in sales, but all I really did was teach my customers. I didn't try to manipulate them. I just told them, here's how it works. Here's why it's great. And I was extremely good at it. So I was invited to train salespeople. And, I went back, got my master's in education, and I'm currently working. I saw someone call me Dr. Margie, which I think is really nice, but I'm not a doctor yet. But finally am at a place in my life and my work where I have the time, and I'm actually pursuing a PhD right now. So fingers crossed, that eventually it'll be true. So, I got into training that way, and discovered that consultants made a whole lot more than corporate trainers. Some of you may have had that same realization. And so it's a lot of risk, and a year like this can be great or terrible for us. I've been fortunate, knocking on my wooden desk, but I became a consultant, completely independent consultant about 10 years ago, and really enjoyed it. And then about 5 years in, I was invited to speak at to not so much speak, but sort of facilitate a reflection area, which was really creative. It's still a very creative idea and very brain aware. So I dug it up before the show. I was telling you, Luis.
It's funny because before we started, Margie was giving me all these gems of just these treasure trove of information about reflection. But let me give you guys some context about how TLDC 16 was sort of put together. One of the pieces that I wanted in place there was, having done events for as long as I have, I used to always it used to be really troubling to me how we would just block out, 10 sessions at one time, at the larger events, and then, have like a 5 to 10 minute break so you can get to the next room, and just do that for 8 blocks a day. And so basically by the end of the day, we would be in Las Vegas, just completely exhausted from, all the stimuli and all the sessions and everything that, I didn't feel like I was ever really taking anything away from any of these sessions. What I would end up doing was I would go, take a walk around the pool or something after, and then miss a couple sessions, because I just needed that. I needed it to get into my head. And even now, after I sit through like a webinar, or I finish reading a book or anything like that, I have to take a walk. Even my TLD cast, these things, I need to just take off and just take a break and really think about what I've learned. And so when we built TLDC 16, I wanted that reflection built into in between the sessions. And that was sort of like we didn't have as much content at the conference because of that, but I thought it was important. And instead of, we had half an hour breaks in between sessions, just to give people the time to go outside, sit down, open up a journal or notebook. And that's why we always like to give journals out at the events, and just write down what you learned. And so maybe we can start there. Margie, I know you posted that 2016 podcast that you did with Rick Zanotti, and before we even had a TLD cast, and I encourage everybody to listen to that. But how about the importance of that piece of being able to sit down and and journal and that type of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to start by crediting pioneer John Dewey.
Yes.
Long before there was neuroscience, he used science to study how we learn. And he made a statement that is recognized as true today, and that we can demonstrate now through hard science. And it's, we do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. And one of the dangers in our very fast-paced world, particularly in the workplace, where we're being asked to do more with less in a shorter period of time, is that we don't put in those breaks. So what happens in the conferences is really a microcosm of what happens every day to us at work. We go from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting. Calls are scheduled back to back. There's little or no time, to just take care of basic physical needs, like getting a drink of water, getting up and stretching before that next call is on you, let alone actually reflecting. And you have to fight for it. And you will have to fight for it for your learners. So here's why that's so important. It's so important because of dopamine. Now, dopamine is a transmitter, chemical in your brain that produces different feelings. And what dopamine does is it makes you feel good. It's part of the reward cycle. And what it's doing is it's your body telling you, that was great, do it again. So we get dopamine from essential survival behaviors like, and some of these will make sense and some might be a bit of a surprise for you. So eating, right? We get a reward, it feels good. Even satisfying your thirst, drinking something, sex, play, you get the dopamine effect, and learning. So why does your brain want you to keep playing and keep learning? Well, those are essential survivor skills. So if we rob our learners and ourselves of that jolt of dopamine, first of all, it makes a very long, increasingly unhappy day. And so you wonder why you're so tired. Dopamine is energizing and it boosts you up, and it's happy positivity. And it's very difficult to get it from other means other than doing something. Now, you asked about a journal. The great thing about a journal, and you know, you can go back to Benjamin Franklin, you can go back to Julius Caesar. Great leaders tend to have discovered for themselves, much like you did, Louise, that discover that they're better when they keep a journal. And so I strongly recommend everyone to keep a journal. And in fact, my clients, I always recommend that they give those journals out, just like you do in TLDC, to encourage that and to role model keeping a journal, that the leaders should walk around with their journals and be seen to write in them, and every once in a while share something that they captured in their journal.
Yeah, I want to read a couple things. Like Cassie posted a great comment. She said, "It's a truth. Clients want more content in less time during the sales meeting, but they want application of that, demonstration of skill, and yet are not always open to what's needed to make that happen. Reflection time, so they can think of how they will apply it all."
Right.
You know, and then in quotation, she says, "But can't we learn that in an hour tomorrow?" You know,
Yes.
so yeah,
Well,
I'm sure,
yeah, so true, Cassie, and it's so great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And you know, one of the things I was thinking of mentioning is this idea of action planning is really a reflection activity. A lot of us use an action plan at the end of a course. What are you going to do with this information? Well, that's reflection. What that's doing is letting that really tenuous new neuron chain with all the information you just got reach out to existing neuron chains, existing learning, things you already know, and interweave them so that they become part of the fabric of your memories. And if you don't do that, the danger is that you start to forget it. And we all know the forgetting curve begins immediately after you've been exposed to something new. So reflection can be a great way to fight that forgetting curve. And that might be a way in. If you're getting a lot of pushback about reflection, don't even call it that. Call it action planning. Or build an activity where you take notes and then share your experience with a partner. Because I know one of the things we talked about right before we started, Louise, is can this be a shared experience? Absolutely. It can be very powerful that way.
right. And I think that, yeah, you know, and you'd mentioned that I was modeling that by sharing that worksheet, which I hadn't even considered. Right. And I do think that it's absolutely, yeah, it's especially for, so you know, like with 2020 in particular, I felt like reflection, I'm just never going to have an opportunity like this to reflect on a year like just had. Right. And so I think it's one of the reasons why it was kind of like really an opportunity for me to start out this year with this particular broadcast. And yeah, and so I definitely encourage everybody to do that. I also want to mention there are a couple of polls that I have in the interface that if you guys want to check it out. The first question was, do you have a personal reflective practice? And we've got 100% that says yes, which is great. And also, do you build reflection into your course or curriculum design? Right now, 75% of the audience says yes. So that's excellent. That is great to hear.
Yeah. And, I see the comment um, that often it's built in. Let me see, where's that from? Ann Coppins?
Yeah.
And that is unfortunate. And I know, Cassie, you made a similar point. Is it's always this question of time. But here's the thing, when you take 10 minutes to reflect, you are better prepared to learn the next thing, and you're going to incorporate it better. So it actually speeds the learning up. You won't need to repeat things as often. The insights will be deeper. So you can make the case that it's well worth the time. And I keep a journal, and in fact, it's sitting right here. And I'm doing a lot of that right now. Like most of us, I'm planning to what's my year look like, and I've been doing that for the last few weeks. But a journal is a lifelong habit. I think that's the difference between a participant guide. Some people ask me, well, isn't that just a participant guide? Or a personal diary, which is more, superficial. A journal should really challenge you. And in fact, there are journals and there are digital apps for journals that prompt you with questions, so that you can, even on a day when you don't feel particularly reflective, the right open-ended question will force you. As a matter of fact, I'm so glad you brought up handwriting, because research after research, every study reveals that the brain learns better with handwritten notes.
Wow. Wait, let me get some context in there for the podcast listeners there, Margie. Design lady had written, does the brain respond better to a handwritten journal than a digital journal? That's a great question.
Yeah. And while apps are cool and we all want to be paperless and save the planet, there is value in pen and ink. And the value is that it uses a lot more of your brain, because it takes much more movement and much more decision making to decide what you're going to write. Or you might draw a picture. Another great reflective activity is to ask people to represent what they just learned in a drawing. And you can do that in your journal. It's harder to do digitally. And I had a long conversation with a professor who is disabled, who said, I can't draw. I can't handwrite in a journal. So I did some research, and if you were in that position, then it would help if you spoke it out loud. As you're entering it, talk to yourself. It actually doesn't mean you're crazy. It's engaging more of your brain. It's giving you more pathways in to that information so you can retrieve it later. And so if you don't have a friend you can sit and reflect with after a learning experience, do it for yourself. Sit down and jot some ideas down and then talk about it to yourself. Here's what I got out of this. Here's what I'm going to do. Because when your brain hears that, it makes a deeper commitment to that information and recognizes that that's important. Yeah, and some tablets allow you a simulation of a handwriting experience, Toddy. That's a great point as well. So you really do want that motion. You want to engage that kinesthetic part, because your brain's in your whole body. So what you're doing is you're engaging the brain in your fingertips when you do that. The neurons in your head are connected to every neuron in your body. Anywhere you have a nerve, that's actually brain cells. Same thing. So, and they're all connected through the spinal cord. So we tend to forget the brain in our fingertips sometimes.
Yeah. I love how you're connecting all of this to like these, our biological or physiological sort of processes. It really kind of, strengthens the point overall of how important this could potentially be. And there are some fantastic recommendations in chat right now for like Rocket Books and let's see, one tablet called Anne. Yeah, those look really, really interesting. A Wacom tablet, which, I have a couple of those, which I never use and probably should break it out.
Well, maybe you could break it out. But if another nice thing about a paper journal, you never have to worry about losing your connection.
Yeah.
It's
I've
always there with you.
got mine. I go
Yeah.
through them. I have because of TLDC, I have a whole stack of them that I just pull out whenever I'm done with another one. So that's kind of convenient. Now, Margie, let me ask you, how have you seen instances of how folks have integrated reflection into, like, say, their courses and the curriculums? I know that we went through that a little bit earlier, talking about at the end of, like a series of questions after a course or something, like, what have you seen out there?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I've seen most recently is I'm working with ATD, and I know several of you guys are also members of ATD, on their Certified Learning Professional certificate series. And they're now adding a reflection, and that's an online course like so many are, and it's self-paced with videos. So kind of a Coursera model, but I recommended that they add a reflection activity so the learner isn't completely passive. So they have to share with other people who are taking the course, what did this mean to you? And that's a very simple thing to do. So you might want to think about, because the neat thing about reflection is it happens after the learning, what we consider the learning experience. It's really when the learning begins, as Dewey tells us. So it can be, if you can't squeeze it into the actual e-learning course or the live virtual delivery, it can be assigned or pushed out as a mini activity they do later. And so what you want is someone to have to summarize what they've learned, what it means to them, what they're going to do about it. That's where this idea of action comes in. And then if they share that with someone else, it could be their manager, it could be a peer, it could be someone else in the class, then they get some feedback from that and they see what other people have done. So having people share reflections can often trigger ideas they wouldn't have thought of on their own. And now you're pulling in more dopamine, because as soon as you're engaging socially, that's another survival skill. That's why so many of us right now are depressed and frustrated and lonely, because we're not getting enough dopamine. We're all addicted to it. It keeps us alive. It tells us that we're doing the right things. So putting in that kind of asynchronous reflection works just as well. And I see Mo has, that's right. Thank you for sharing that. It can be synchronous or asynchronous. So we can do it in a space between, say, I like to do it after every learning objective, because that's a good, did they get this learning objective and what are they going to do with it? If for some reason you're in an environment where they won't accept that, you could still do it asynchronously outside of that. And people will take the time to engage, especially if it meant something to them.
Yeah, going back to Anne had a good comment earlier about what she saw when she said, what I saw in the corporate e-learning world, that the reflection part of a course tended to be skipped until when you have time. And anybody have any, or Margie or anyone in chat, if you guys have any suggestions on how to make that work for folks?
Yeah. Well, one thing I would do if it's e-learning is, you can program it so it can't be skipped. So if you are the developer or you're writing the storyboard, I would make it a mandatory trackable activity that they have to do. And, we're not talking a lot of time, not talking very many minutes in order to do that. And Mo brings up a point about it. It helps to be visually attractive. We were talking a little bit about this too, is that a visually attractive journal, and that's different for every individual, what they think is attractive, but if it appeals to you, you're more likely to get involved in it. So you want to make it easy, you want to make it fun. It's not supposed to be too structured. The whole idea of reflection is each individual brain is making its own decisions about what's important out of the content. Now, you're doing that anyway. You actually can't avoid reflecting. Your brain is always doing it. It's always deciding, do I keep this information or does this have no value to me? Because it can't hold everything. And if I do keep this information, how is it related to what I already know? Does it change something? Did it surprise me? So those are the kinds of questions you can ask. Did something surprise you? Did you change your opinion? Are you going to change what you do based on this? If so, how? Did this affirm something? And are you going to do more of something? So those kind of questions. Sometimes I like to put it as a start, stop, continue, which I honestly don't know who came up with that, but I know it wasn't me, but it's a great model. What are you going to start doing differently? What are you going to stop doing? What are you going to continue and maybe do more of? And there's a reflection activity that doesn't even have to be called reflection. It's just a discussion, so if you get a lot of pushback, just, build it anyway. Build it in a way that the learner can't skip it, the instructor can't skip it, and you will get better results for it. And then maybe you won't have to fight so hard next time.
Margie, you're going to love this question from Anne. She is asking, can chatbots function as that reflection part for a course?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, and you gave me an opportunity to promote my new book, which is AI and Talent Development. I think that's my link for that. It might not be. Let me see. That might. Yeah, I think it is. Which is published by ATD Press. And I spent a whole chapter on chatbots. And in my research, I found a woman who is a personal coach. And she uses a chatbot for times when she's not available to her clients. And it doesn't tell you what to do. It just asks you questions. And it's a great way to do it, Gabby. One reason is because the brain can't tell the difference between a simulated conversation and a real one, and one with a human being. And so the experience gives you that social connection, as well as asking the question. So instead of it being a static list of reflection questions, you're adding that social engagement with the bot. As people are more and more comfortable with chatbots, they're easily accepting this. And so I actually played with this particular one, and it was kind of uncanny how much it felt like someone was guiding me through to my own conclusions. And I actually put that example in the book to give you guys an idea of what it's like. Chatbots, that's a great use. A lot of people use chatbots in learning for things like practicing engaging with the customer, and the bot will react strongly or positively depending on how you positioned things, or simply as a consultant. So, hi, what do you want to learn today, to help the learner sort through an LMS, but using them to actually force someone or encourage someone to reflect and guide that reflection is a really great way to do them. And I see that Gabby has done that and put them in as a means of reflection. And again, you're using technology, and you are, if you build it in, if it is simply part of good, solid instructional design, which it is, then you don't have to ask permission. It's part of the course. And so there's a lot of creative ideas coming up in the chat, Mo, using them in breakout rooms and games is another. And again, games give us that dopamine reward too, right? Winning or solving a puzzle. So they're all somewhat connected because your brain doesn't compartmentalize the way we try to make it. So when you talk about reflection, you almost can't help but talk about learning. You can't help but talk about repetition, because the more you reflect on something, that's one means of repeating what you've learned. There's a social aspect. Even if you're only talking to yourself, that goes across the same social channel inside your brain as if you're talking to someone else. So if you've been kind of locked down and you found yourself talking to yourself, that's your brain giving you that necessary social engagement. So there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It means your brain's trying to keep you from being crazy.
Right. I love it. Mo, I'm going to have to reach out to you about using chatbots to make breakout rooms. That sounds really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah. Another question from Anne. Is dopamine also what helps us take action?
Oh, that's a really complicated question, Anne. So what the dopamine producing neurons do is they communicate to your reward center, and that motivates behavior. So it doesn't directly cause the behavior, but it makes the behavior desirable. So in that sense, it does make people more likely to act. And it's not really the reward itself, it's the anticipation of the reward that gets the dopamine going. So one way you can make it more likely that people are going to actually take a specific action is to have themselves imagine that they're doing it now and picture the positive results of that action. And that will immediately stimulate dopamine. And even before you've actually done the act, you are getting reinforced for intending to do it, for imagining what it will feel like. And then when you actually do it, you'll get that feeling again. And it creates a pattern that actually is very similar to addiction, but it's positive addiction. It's addiction to getting that reward for doing the right thing. So I hope that answered your question. It's not a direct correlation, but it's certainly connected.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Like Trisha's saying, visualization can really improve performance. And I think, that's, that's absolutely the case. Let's see.
And that's another use of a journal, is that people will often visualize their success before. So when you're doing your reflecting activity, you probably not only looked at last year, but also thought about this year, right, Luis?
Yes.
And when you did that, you were visualizing what your year is going to look like. And that probably felt really good.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
That was your
there's a lot to think about, and I think that in 2020 in particular, like I'm seeing people like call it the great pause, where all of a sudden here we are, we're all like kind of stuck inside and we have just all of this time to think. And so it's kind of lends itself to being, it has been a very reflective year. I know that for myself, I've just had a ton of time outdoors, just sort of being able to take walks and just like consider things. And it's been tremendously helpful. I think the part that is difficult for me, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit, is I will go from a, sort of a reflective state and then come back to my computer. But boom, as soon as I hit social media, I feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and I, like what I'm hearing or sort of understanding is that maybe I'm getting hit with all of this dopamine, and then all of a sudden it's like, what do I reflect on after that? Like,
and
it's kind of a chaotic.
How do I make meaning out of that? So that, a lot of and I don't know anybody else, when I was studying for my master's, it was a classic program where they taught you these learning models, which were, how great thinkers thought we learned. And most of them have been pretty much debunked by knowing how we actually learn. But one that has stood the test of time, there may be others, is Constructivism. And basically what Constructivism tells us is that there is no such thing as sharing the same experience. So right now, every one of you is taking something different out of this experience. And if you're listening to the recording, that applies to you as well, because your brain is constructing that message, those takeaways, based on what you paid attention to. Like maybe you zone out every time I start talking about research, but you paid attention to what's going on in the chat. You know, something was particularly important to you, so like chatbots, so you paid a little more attention there. And you connect that to what you've already experienced, which, because we adults have so much more experience in that vault, we have a lot of different ways we can go with it. So we all construct that learning ourselves, and reflection is where we construct it. Now, your brain also reflects while you're sleeping. So one of the things that we discovered is that when you're teaching a mouse how to get through a maze to get to their reward, which is usually food, at night, they replay that maze in their brain. We can actually see it in the hippocampus. We can see them retracing their steps. We do the same thing. So if we have, and that's why sometimes you'll notice that you have work dreams, or you solve a problem in your dream. You wake up and you have a different perspective on it. Or something is easier the next day if you're learning something new. So your brain is automatically reflecting, even unconsciously.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. And so you can plant a seed. You can even do something as simple as saying, now I want you to go home today and think about this. Think about this the rest of the day. Look for opportunities to use this. And tomorrow we're going to talk about what you saw. Well, that way you didn't have to design anything. You just put that little suggestion and you've got your learners off and reflecting. So if you have them do that during the day, there's a very good chance they're going to continue that consolidation while they sleep.
Very cool. Now, you know, like in our Q&A, one of the higher voted questions was, can reflective practice be a shared activity?
I love that question.
Yeah.
And absolutely.
And talk about it a little bit. So, I mean, I guess, like, I'm kind of wondering, like, for instance, well, what are your thoughts on that as far as it being a shared activity?
Yeah, you know, we've actually sort of talked about it already. You role modeled with your example of sharing your own reflection and how you structured it, and inviting others, you know, to join in that. So the reason it works so well is that in order to share it with others, you have to really think about it enough to make it coherent. So if you're reflecting by yourself, you might have some feelings, some emotions about the experience. And by the way, emotions are very important for learning. If you don't have emotions, I could take Dewey's quote and change it, is learning happens with emotions, which are triggered when you reflect. Some kind of emotional response will happen, but now you have to verbalize that. So you could say, I was really excited about this. This is what this meant to me, and share that with another person. So a really good activity is to give people a minute or two to reflect by themselves, and then a minute or two to share with a partner. And it's that little pause. You use that word pause, and I think that's a great word for it. It's that pause, take a breath, then jump into a paired activity. Now you're going to see the insights from another person. Oh, I didn't see it that way. And that now becomes part of your experience as well. So sharing with each other is very powerful. And it can be, I think it's normally, because reflection is very intimate. It's something happening for you personally. That's all that constructivism going on, that it's often best to share it with just one or two other people, so you get that same collaboration back, as opposed to asking people to share reflections in a large group. There might be a reason why you want to do that certain times, but it's probably not so much for reflection as maybe as a review activity, or to get people to make a public commitment that they're going to make a change. Those are very valuable, but they're a little bit different mental process that's going on there. So I would definitely, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, I would keep it to a very intimate sharing if you're going to use a sharing activity.
Wow. You know, and Anne is saying, she has a comment here, I love that we reflect when we sleep as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, your brain does a lot of work while you're sleeping, which is why another thing that's happened this year is a lot of us have not gotten the same quality of sleep. There's, things to worry about. There's interruptions, there's anxiety. And so it can really mess with your sleep patterns. And your brain needs that. It cleans out chemical toxins and it organizes the experiences of the day and connects them. It cross-references them. And that can only happen during sleep. So if you want to remember things, you need to give yourself the gift of sleep.
Nice.
The Tetris effect.
Yeah, Mo was saying, it's called the Tetris effect or the Tetris syndrome, and there are many neuroscience research papers regarding it. It's very interesting. Now, Margie, I want to kind of wrap up here, but one last sort of question that maybe is more of a personal thing for myself, but how do you relate reflection to, like, say, something like meditation?
Well, what's interesting to me about meditation, and I'm still trying, I am not real good at practicing meditation. I'm trying to learn because I know it's very good for your brain. Do we have meditators in here who are meditating? Thank you for sharing that link, Mo.
Yeah.
Hey, John.
Yes, and I'm somebody like I'm trying to. My meditation practice is just like once or twice a year. I feel like, but
yeah. And the Calm app is actually one of the things I've tried. What you're trying to do is quiet your conscious mind and get in touch really with your body, which is why breathing is so important, relaxation is so important. And so it's a very hard thing for most of us in Western society to deal with because it means letting go, and we're all about control. Since we've been little kids, we've been trying to control our world, and that's how you get success. And it's a different mindset, and a very powerful one. And the research has shown that people who meditate live longer, they avoid dementia, they feel better, they're healthier. So it is an excellent habit, and I'm working on that one. What's different about it? And again, like everything the brain does is all connected, right? All the neurons are talking to each other all the time. So what is different about it is, and this is my layman's term so you guys correct me, meditation does not have a target or a goal, whereas reflection does. You're actually thinking about something. And that's what you want to do, to reflect. You're focused on it. You are consciously making connections that you're going to use later, planning actions. So it is much more of an active, conscious process when you're doing it, when you're not sleeping. And when you're sleeping, your brain is programmed to do that. And it is very targeted. It's not just randomly connecting things together. It's very targeted in what it does.
Love it. Love it. Let's see. There was something here. Another question. Oh, instructional design lady. Could reflection be linked to Bloom's taxonomy under the affective domain?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so I could conceive of writing an objective, a learning objective, that would be focused on what are they going to do? They're going to reflect on how they use the learning and come up with an action plan, for example. And I don't think that one comes. So reflection is more than just the affective domain, because it needs to be, it's back to your brain can be a heat-seeking missile. If you give it a target, it will continue to work in the background and seek that target. So identifying target behaviors that you personally buy into and intend to adapt is the start of behavior change. And then, it still has to be reinforced. There's all kinds of ways we can reinforce it. So reflection, though, is the start of that. That's where the learning begins.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah,
I want to add
about books. I definitely do. When I read a book, by the time I'm done, I'm one of those people who writes in the margins, and and I write questions like, I wonder if this is true, and then I go back and I reread just my notes on the book, and what does that tell me, and where do I go from there?
No, that's great. That's great. I wanted to mention the great comment by Julia here, where she said, meditation permits me space for the active reflection to take place. And I think that's a great way of kind of relating the two.
That. Yeah. Thank you, Julie. I think you're probably, after meditating for a bit, you're probably in a much more receptive mindset for reflection, to maximize the reflection.
That's true. That's true.
Also walking, and you mentioned walking around, Luis. And it's very difficult these days to get it because of this Zoom, this whatever platform you're using, the idea of being in front of the camera. It's a good idea to either let people see that you're walking around the room or turn the camera off for a while, because walking around stimulates different cognitive processes than sitting still, and you need both. And so if you are wanting to think a little, that's why it was so neat in TLDC that it wasn't like a formal presentation that we were leading about reflection. It was a beautiful little area with plants and trees and, and the idea was to come in here, it's quiet, wander around and reflect. And so anything you can do to get outside in nature, first of all, because your brain loves that, your brain needs that, fresh air, and walking, physically walking, stimulates cognition, and it will also help you consolidate memories. So if you can build that into your classes, even virtual ones, it's very powerful.
No, that's great. That actually gives me an idea. Like, if we ever do a live event again, we should set up walking groups for people after certain blocks, so that everyone could just kind of walk and sort of reflect on whatever session they just attended. Margie, I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank you so much for doing this. It was a lot of fun, a great way to start out the year. I want to thank everybody for that jumped in today. Hope that your 2021 is going as planned for you so far. And I think I've got some exciting things to announce for 2021 too that are coming up. I've been doing lots of planning, so you guys will see that in the future. Margie, if you can, please feel free to post a link to your book again. And then even I have the link to to that podcast episode too, which I'm gonna drop in right now. So you guys, if you feel like giving this one a listen from 2016, please do. It's with Jennifer Lebret and Margie, which that was a fantastic what they did for us at TLDC 616. And with that, great to see everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
I've got Joe Suarez next week. Get into the chat, into the Slack group if you can, and download that template if you haven't already. I'll be posting mine today. And
nice to see you, John and Toddy. And great, Marie. What a great time to start a journal.
Yeah.
Let me know how it goes. Oh, let me just give you guys my email address.
Mm-hmm.
If you have follow-up questions or it sparked an idea, love to hear from you.
All right. Margie, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Talk to you again soon.
Okay.
Bye.